Many of you, okay, we got that. So many of you I've met and know, and as I told Wallace and Ron, the last time I spoke to Portland was in 2015, and that was great. It was a great trip. Unfortunately, I didn't get home till like 4 in the morning. I remember that one. It was the flight from hell. The mechanical problems at the airport, and we got rerouted, and I finally got into O'Hare Airport like 4 o'clock, and I had to call up my limo. It was bad. But today I'm at this undisclosed location in northern Illinois, so I'm fairly close. Well, I'm actually in my home office, so there you have it. Zoom has its advantages. So, all right, who wrote The Secret Doctrine? Let's play a little game, shall we? Let's just have a little fun before we get into the serious stuff. I'm going to throw out, and now for this, you'll have to unmute yourself. I'm going to ask you, and you can just hit your space bar or unmute, shout out. I'm going to throw out a few titles of well-known theosophical books. And let's just see who can identify the author. But let's not just have one person do it all. I mean, in every group, there's somebody who could answer this all the way through. So let's start with, we'll do an easy one, Masters and the Path. And you
Is that Alice Bailey or Ledbetter?
Ledbetter, Charles Webster Ledbetter. There you go, Masters and the Path. How about this one? This might be a little harder. It's a much older book, Kingdom of the Gods. It's got lots of color plates in it.
Jeffrey Hodson.
Oh, very good, Wallace. Darn. All right. How about The Hidden Side of Things? We already had one of his books. Take a wild guess.
Leadbeater.
Yep, you got it. All righty. You're zeroing in on that trip to Hawaii, Wallace. Now this one will be a little tougher. You know the person, I'm not going to say him or her, but A Study in Consciousness. Not too many people.
Sender.
Huh? Nope, not Pablo.
Besson.
Yes, Annie Besson. There you go. Yeah, it takes a long time, Theosophy, and not too many people have read that book. Why? Because it's very difficult. How about Man, God, and the Universe?
Tomney.
Oh, yes, I.K. Timney. How about The Letters of H.P. Blavatsky?
What?
You all fail if you don't get that one.
What did he? I didn't get what he said.
The Letters of H.P. Blavatsky. They're letters written by.
Blavatsky.
Oh, yes. And now the most important one, Serving a Higher Purpose.
Bruce.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, you all pass. Very good. Okay, so anyway, I'm going to do the screen share now. I have a PowerPoint. And I will be closing it down occasionally. Instead of saving all the discussion for the end of the talk, I'll try to break it up here and there. Okay, that's the way I prefer to do it. So let's find, here we are. And let me get in the, okay, and let me minimize this other one. There we are, get that up there. Okay, here we are. Who wrote The Secret Doctrine? And what we're going to do is, these are the parts. I'm going to start off with a historical perspective because I like at least on this particular talk, I like to frame it, give it a historical background. I'll talk a little bit about Blavatsky and her teachers. I'll have some interesting quotes from people who actually observed her in the process of writing by hand the pages, the manuscript of the Secret Doctrine. And then at the end, I'll kind of make a few comments about what I think the importance of the Secret Doctrine is, and then we'll just have a little wrap up, okay? So I'm going to start off, since we're going to do a historical perspective, I am going to start off with a quote by an English philosopher, John Locke. Some of you may have heard of him. He was actually one of the most influential thinkers of that period in Western history called the Enlightenment. I'm sure you've heard of that, the Enlightenment. And when I say influential, I'm not exaggerating, because his ideas were greatly influenced the founding fathers of this country and the writing of the Declaration of Independence. So this particular quote, even though it was written some time ago, I think is still just as relevant today as it was in his time, and probably much earlier. New opinions are always suspected and usually opposed without any other reason but because they are not already common. So why is that not true? Have you not observed that? And you can just chime in here. Have you not observed that in your own life? Something new comes out and people resist it right away, simply because it's new. So my question is, why? What do you think that is? Is that just something about human nature, or what is the reason for that?
It could be fear.
Could be fear. Okay, that's possible. Fear of the unknown.
Right?
You know, we know what we know, we're comfortable with what we know, and then something new comes along. It might threaten our view of the world, our understanding of the world. So let's go back. And oh, excuse me, I closed that a little too soon there.
You know, by the garage and let the, you know, the wetness.
Yes.
So I'm going to just make a few comments before we go to the next slide. During her lifetime, as many of you know, HPB encountered intense opposition to the ideas that she was putting forth in her writings. And I'm going to go back a little bit further, quite a number of centuries. You've heard about the mystery schools of ancient Greece, you know, 400, 500, 600 BC, and before that, even the Egyptian mystery schools. But at some point, the mystery schools of Greece became corrupted and they died, basically faded away. And with the birth of Christianity a few centuries later, the esoteric teachings in the West had to go underground. They didn't disappear, but they went underground.
The phone bomb.
As Christianity became more institutionalized and gained political power, it became a very dominant force in the Western world. But then with the collapse of the Roman Empire a few centuries later, and what followed, I still refer to as the Dark Ages. Some people don't like that term, but I think it's apropos because it's a period when rational thought kind of went out the window and it took a back seat, we could say, to religious dogma. And if you value freedom of thought and critical thinking, then a time like that, when you're not allowed to express critical thinking, that's a very, very dark climate. So it was a period that lasted a number of centuries, unfortunately. Now, the period moving ahead now, 800-900 years or so, the period from the 15th century to the 16th century, that's the years 1400 to 1500, that is another remarkable period in Western history known as the Renaissance. You've all heard of that. And during the Renaissance, during that period of time, there was a rediscovery of, for example, Greek philosophy, which had Greek philosophy was very prominent in the Mediterranean world, 1500 years earlier, but it was kind of with the church, the Christian church coming to power, that was pushed aside as pagan thought. So during the Renaissance, rational thinking was allowed, or at least maybe it wasn't allowed so much as they couldn't keep it suppressed anymore. It started coming out. So luminaries of that period, and we're going to now go back to the screen share. Luminaries of that period of history include, and I'm going to start off with a scientist, Nicholas Copernicus. You can see his birth and death date there. He is primarily known for his astronomy work, and he introduced the heliocentric theory. I'm sure you've heard of that. The heliocentric system helio is a Greek word meaning sun. Heliocentric means the center. So in his work with astronomy, he said he rejected Ptolemy's geocentric system, which 1500 years earlier, Ptolemy was Egyptian astronomer, and he said the Earth is the center of the solar system. Well, Copernicus said, no, I don't think so. I think it's the sun, and I think the Earth and all the other planets revolve around the sun. Now, the church was very powerful, as I said at that time. They subscribed to the Ptolemaic system, that the Earth, everything revolved around the Earth. And they would not like a guy like Copernicus, who was well known, putting out writings that it's a heliocentric theory. And bad things would have happened to him. Remember, this is the period of the Inquisition. Bad things would have happened to him, but he had the very good sense to die in 1543, shortly before they actually published his work. Or actually, his work was published shortly before he died. So that was a very convenient exit for him, because he didn't have to suffer what some of the other people suffered in that era. So then we go to Geo Donald Bruno. You may have heard of this fellow, born in Italy. Look at the date. You see 1543 is when Copernicus left. And a few years later, 5 years later, Bruno was born. He also embraced the idea of a heliocentric theory, which at that time was still pretty radical, and it was anathema to the church hierarchy. They did not like that. No. He also had some other ideas, which are in his writings are very, very theosophical. The idea that and science has long since embraced that, but not back in those days, the universe is infinite. He put forth in his writings that there's infinite number of worlds, multiplicity. This was all very radical stuff back then. So he was a hunted man. He was like the movie David Jansen, The Fugitive. Remember that show? They were always hunting him. Well, this guy was on the go. I do a talk about him. He was constantly hounded, and they finally tricked him, and they got him. And then they tried to get him to recant. The church people, they tried to get Bruno to recant. He would not. And so for his troubles, he ended up being burnt alive at the stake in the year 1600. A gruesome, awful death by the loving church fathers of the Christian church, the church of turning the other cheek. Yes. So that's what happens to people sometimes when they go against the status quo. And then Galileo met almost a similar fate, not quite. He was very well known, very well respected. Notice the dates now. 1564 is the date that he was born. You go back, when did Copernicus die? So about 20 years prior. So Galileo was very familiar with Copernicus' writings. So guess what? He also embraced at some point the heliocentric theory. Of course, he had to replicate it because the basis of scientific work is to not just take the word of somebody else. You have to replicate the experiment, go through it and find out, verify for yourself. Well, when that got out, he also suffered the wrath of the Inquisition, and he was locked up for years. Finally, though, they got to him. It was horrible conditions. He finally, under duress, he renounced, just to stay alive. So they eased up on him, but he spent the remainder of his life under house arrest. So again, going back to that earlier quote that we had, new ideas are often resisted simply because they're new. This is unfortunately something in human nature. This not a very admirable trait, but it's real. It's there. That's the fact. So next, during the 18th century, a new movement. We had the Renaissance that I talked, after the Dark Ages, and the Renaissance, kind of a rebirth of all culture and all art and everything. Then we had, now keep in mind, the science is starting to, Galileo and others, Roger Bacon, other scientists. So science is coming to the fore. Religion is still very powerful, but their power is starting to wane. And so then you had a movement that swept Europe called the Enlightenment. And this is a movement that put a high premium on rational and logical thought, on reason, not religious, not just belief on faith, but reason. So new ideas of liberty, fraternity, and progress, these gained acceptance. And the church gradually over a period of time began to lose power, and dogmatic beliefs you have to believe it because some authority says so, that kind of thinking began to fade. It's still with us to some extent, but it began to fade, nowhere near as powerful as it had been. And so narrow-minded thinking amongst the intelligentsia, thinking people, gradually gave way to intellectual curiosity. And so then we had a flourishing period where science came to the forefront, and today we have all these technologies, these wonderful things that we have today started because of this movement. So by the time of the mid to late 19th century, now I'm getting closer to the present here, taking you through this little perspective on history. By that time, Blavatsky's day, religion had been largely eclipsed by science. But here's the rub. The science of that day was very materialistic. Very materialistic. And gone was the belief in God, like the belief in miracles. This was all considered superstition for ignorant people. And people who considered themselves to be educated look to science now for all the important answers to life. And so anything that smacked of religion was tolerated, but the people who considered themselves intellectuals, they kind of looked down upon religion in a sense. So you have an educated elite in all the countries, Germany, France, whatever, England, who believed only in things that could be weighed or measured in the laboratory. And this kind of leads way to a materialistic point of view of life. Whoops, sorry, got the wrong. And for people that adopt that mode of thinking, there's a suitable epitaph. And I have a nice little image of that. There you go. For those people, I think that's a very suitable thing to put on their tombstone. Remember me for my stuff, because material things are very important to them. But there's a play written many years ago, you can't take it with you. And that's true. You can't take your wealth or any of that stuff with you when you leave this world. So anyway, it was into this world that HPB released The Secret Doctrine, a book that would draw fire from her enemies and the scientific community, as well as religious institutions. So it's kind of funny. The scientists and the clergy of that day, remember, they're in totally different camps, But on this one point, they really agreed. They had something in common. Both of them did not like the ideas put forth by one Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. On that, they could agree. So anyway, periodically, the Brotherhood of Adepts uses messengers to convey their teachings to the outer world, and HPB fulfilled that role. She was their messenger, their emissary, or their agent to the outer world. And at that time, they were in Tibet, Nepal, India, hidden away from the bustling outer world. She actually met her teacher in the flesh in 1851 as a young woman in London's Hyde Park. She was 20 years old. And at that time, she had a conversation with her teachers. It was made clear to her what role they had in mind for her, because they had been looking for a long time for somebody who would serve as this emissary. She was told of all the troubles, difficulties that she would face if she accepted. And fortunately for us, she did. So 18 years later, now this was 1851, at 20 years old, she met her teacher. And it was another 18 years, 1869, when she actually traveled to Tibet and there stayed for a period of time with the teachers. So this quote is from, as you can see, one of the Mahatma letters. I'm sure you've read it by now, but I'll read it anyway. After nearly a century of fruitless search, our chiefs had to avail themselves of the only opportunity to send out a European body upon European soil to serve as a connecting link between that country and our own. What I find remarkable, and I think a lot of people do, they had been looking for 100 years, looking for people. They obviously had certain criteria in mind. They had somebody. It's like when you're an employer, you're looking for a certain candidate to fulfill a certain job, and you need that person to have certain skill sets, a certain kind of personality, whatever. 100 years. And so anyway, that's fascinating. We could get into that for a little bit. But why? The question is, why did they pick her? What made her so special? Well, let's go to the next screen. Here's why she was chosen. 3 powerful reasons. She had a strong psychic nature. She had, shall we say, certain paranormal abilities. She also had a mind, wow, a powerful intellect. She was no slacker. She could hold her best in conversations with the top elites anywhere, intellectuals anywhere, and she could hold her own, believe me. And then also a character, strength of character, the quality of character. That is something you can't fake. You can't fake that. And that's something that you develop over many lives. She had, for example, unshakable courage because she was attacked on a routine basis, day in and day out. You got to be strong to put up with that stuff. She was fiercely loyal to her teacher and the mission she undertook. And even when she was deathly sick, and the master gave her the option, okay, we know you're sick, you're not feeling well, do you want to opt out? She says, no, I'm going to keep going. And just totally devoted to the teachers and to the mission. So now we get to questions. Now we're getting into the title, who wrote the Secret Doctrine? Why would I even ask that question? No, it's not because I have Alzheimer's. I know who the author is. I can look it up on my book here. It says H.P. Blavatsky, right? Just as it does on your copies. So why would you ask that question anyway? Well, let's preface that by, when is the author not the writer? When is the writer not the author? And when is the author unknown? So let's take a look at each of these categories, and I'll give you some examples. So who is the true author? This question will arise when something is anonymously written, when a pen name or a pseudonym is used instead of the writer's real name, when somebody employs a ghostwriter, or they hire an amanuensis. Menses is plural. I'm sure you know what a ghostwriter is and the others, but amanuensis might need some explanation. And that is somebody that is hired to take, kind of like a secretary that takes dictation. The true author is dictating for, and I'll give you an example, then you'll understand. So we'll get back to that a little bit later. Anonymous. This is an interesting category. You've all probably heard of the Upanishads. Many of you probably have those in your library at the Portland Lodge. There's some of my favorite writings from India. These marvelous, marvelous writings, thousands of years old. We don't know. Whoever wrote them did not put their name, did not put a name on them. We don't know. Another one, more recent, actually around the 14th century, the Cloud of Unknowing. You may not be familiar with this. I have a copy right here. It says it was originally written in Middle English. That's an older form of English. It was originally written in Middle English by an unknown mystic of the 14th century. I'm reading from the back cover. A literary work. It's a literary work of great beauty, and it is because I've read it several times. Great beauty in both style and message, and it offers a practical guide to the path of contemplation. Common sense. I'm sure if you know history, I don't know that they teach history, and I'm not being cute here, but I don't know that they teach history the way they used to in schools these days. So many things have gone by the wayside. But when I was in school, they taught American history, and everybody knew that Thomas Paine was one of the key people, one of the founding people, and his pamphlets that he published, Common Sense, were done anonymously because if the British had found out who was putting those pamphlets out there, he would have been charged with insurrection, probably shot or hung by the neck. So to save his life, they were all done anonymously. Now, certain articles published in the Theosophical journal Lucifer, that's one of the early journals that Blavatsky put out, they were done anonymously. And I've heard it said that certain ones of them are from some of the Mahatmas. Anybody can you think of another example? And just shout out if you think of another anonymous example of a book. So let's go ahead. Pseudonyms. Okay, the Federalist Papers. Again, going back to the founding of this country. These were papers put out by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay, although John Jay only contributed a few. It's mostly Hamilton and Madison, and I have a copy here. It's like about almost 700 pages. Okay, these were little pamphlets that Hamilton and Madison put out to the people in the 13 colonies, advocating that they break away from England. And again, had they been caught, they would have been put in prison or worse, executed. So they were all published under the name Publius. Publius that name was taken from an ancient Roman general. George Eliot, that was a pen name for the English writer Mary Ann Evans. You look at her time when she was born, it's right in the middle of the Victorian era. Women were not supposed to be writing novels back then. That was supposed to be a man's job. And she knew she would have trouble finding a publisher unless she used a man's name. And that's what she did. One of her books, she wrote 7 novels, one of which I remember having to read, I think in high school, called Silas Marner. Okay, here I'm going to ask you a question. Charles Dodgson wrote. I'm sure you don't know if I just give you that name.
Alice in Wonderland.
Oh, you are good. Who said that? Wow.
Kathy. Yeah.
Yeah. He wrote under the pen name of Lewis Carroll, who wrote Under the Looking Glass and Through the Looking Glass. Very, very good. Most times I give this, they don't know. How about Carolyn Keen? Now, this is really this is probably, I don't expect any. All right, this is a collective pseudonym, which, in other words, that pen name was used by various writers, and they wrote a series of novels called the Nancy Drew novels. Remember those? Young folks wouldn't, but us people my age, and Nancy Drew novels, very, very popular. So a whole bunch of people over the period of time used that same name. And now this you may not know, the last one there, that John Algill, when he was president during the 90s, yes, he wrote many articles for the American Theosophists and Quest under his name, but he was such a prolific writer that it would be somewhat unseemly if he could crank out articles like you wouldn't believe. So he didn't want to keep using his name. So he had a pseudonym that he used. And I found this out from my wife, Donna Wimberly, who was his personal secretary during those years. And this is one of those projects that I always wanted to do, but I never, it's not a high priority. I always wanted to go through those 9 years that he was president, pull all the issues of the American Theosophists, try to find, because I know his style of writing, and try to find which are the ones that he wrote. Maybe someday I'll have a chance to do that. Then you have ghostwriters, the first three are politicians. Politicians don't know how to write. They're not known for their writing skills. And even if they did have writing skills, they don't have the time. So they hire somebody called a ghostwriter. Mickey Mantle, famous baseball player with the Yankees. Howard Cosell, broadcasters. Elton John, musician. These people have fabulous skills in some area, but writing is not one of them. So when they want to put a book out with their name, they use a ghostwriter. Okay, let's go to the next category. Here we go. Amanuenses are employed. Now this is, this may surprise you. St. Paul. In Romans, the epistle to the Romans, go to chapter 16:22, and you will find who actually wrote that letter. It was dictated by Paul, but it was an amanuensis called Tertius. And in verse 22, I'm quoting it now, I, Tertius, who wrote this epistle, salute you in the Lord. Yeah, interesting. Speaking of interesting, the great epic poem, which is really a challenge to read, Paradise Lost, John Milton was blind by the time he started. He had gradually lost his sight over many years. And so he had to hire an amanuensis he would dictate. And can you imagine what that would be like? I mean, it's hard enough, like when I wrote my book, you have Word documents and you can go back and revise sentences and change the adjective. Can you imagine being blind, having to dictate that thing in its final form? Now he may have had the guy read it back and, oh, let's change this word to that, but wow. And then I gave a musical example. The English composer, you probably have not heard of. It's a minor composer, but delightful music he has on YouTube. He also became blind during the later years of his life, but he wanted to keep composing. So he hired an amanuensis by the name of Eric Fenby. There's your little trivia. That was the late 19th century. So I'm going to close this now. So we've talked about, giving you examples of pseudonyms. Well, anonymous first. Blavatsky was not anonymous. There's no way she could be anonymous if she wanted to. She certainly did not use a pseudonym. The closest thing to that is the term HPV, but that's basically her initials. That's just an acronym. She didn't need a ghostwriter. She knew how to write. She had the skills. She had fabulous writing skills. And so that's none of these categories, which are all interesting, none of them really apply to her in the writing of the Secret Doctrine. So But the question is still valid. Who wrote The Secret Doctrine? Well, we know from some of the slides back that she was in very close association with these adepts, her teachers, who she revered very highly. And the evidence is, and I'm not going to go into it because it would be a whole lecture in itself, the evidence is from people that have looked into this and looked at the history, is that they assisted her in various capacities when she wrote The Secret Doctrine. So I'm going to go back to the screen share now. This is from the preface of The Secret Doctrine. By the way, tomorrow we'll have that workshop on The Secret Doctrine. And I hopefully will do less talking and we will have more back and forth conversation. But that's what the purpose of a workshop is, to have more interaction. The author, the writer rather, feels it necessary to apologize for the long delay. So, okay, we'll skip that last part. Okay, the main part I want to focus on right now for purposes of this talk is that first line. The author, then you got that long dash, the writer rather. Notice a couple things. First of all, she is referring to herself in the third person, which is a certain style of writing. But notice too that author is capitalized and writer is not. It's lowercase. It's almost like if somebody was speaking this, if I were speaking to you, you can say things and in mid-sentence you realize you said the wrong word or whatever, and you can say, the author, no, I mean the writer. That kind of thing happens all the time because you can think a lot better when you're writing and taking your time. So if this was a mistake, she definitely had the time. She could have crossed that out and just said, the writer feels it necessary to apologize. So she intentionally left that in there as a clue. It's a clue. And the fact, to me, this I deduced on my own, just using, I think, logic and intuition. The fact that she used lowercase for writer, that's her, because we know she wrote them down. We had people witnessing her writing them down on sheets of paper. The author capitalized. That's indicating maybe respect for her teachers. Maybe remember I said they are looking for a messenger to bring their teachings to the European world. So that's my take on that. But it's a very, when I first started reading The Secret Doctrine, I passed over that. I didn't even, it was like later I said, wait a minute, there's more here than meets the eye. Now this is a little bit of further in the preface. These truths, this is kind of a general introductory statement. These truths are in no sense put forward as a revelation, as a revelation from Jesus, a revelation from Buddha. No, it's not that. Nor does the author claim the position of a revealer of the mystic lore now made public for the first time. See, many people who have an ego were thinking about themselves and they had stumbled somehow across these teachings. They would say, yeah, this is my stuff. This is my stuff. And they would, with their big inflated ego, they would take credit, which would be very disingenuous and very dishonest. But the important thing is here, she's saying these are not new teachings. These are not new teachings. Because, we call theosophy by different terms, the ageless wisdom, or the perennial, I like Aldous Huxley's term, the perennial philosophy. Perennial, you think of flowers, perennial flowers, they come back each spring every year. And it's kind of like history goes in cycles. And like when we had the Dark Ages, certain things, or actually before that, the Greek mystery schools that I spoke of earlier, those secrets had to go underground. So these things come forward at certain times in history when the situation is opportune. They're not always there. So we are now you and I are living in a time when these teachings are available. They're printed in books. We are very, very fortunate to be beneficiaries of this time in history. But human nature being what it is, we know that there are a lot of people who, in the name of power, would like to suppress free thinking and powers. And we saw that in Soviet Union for 70 years when the Bolsheviks took over Russia, kicked out the czars, and everybody thought, great, the czars were not very popular, but it turned out the Bolsheviks were much worse. They clamped down on freedom of speech. They banished religion. So we are living in a time, we are very fortunate to have been living in a time when ideas are open and we can educate ourselves. And she says, this work is a partial statement of what she herself has been taught by more advanced students, that's her teachers, supplemented in a few details only by the results of her own study and observation. Now, we're going to shift gears here, so let me close this here. I'm sure when you had people, when you were open in Portland Lodge and people were attending meetings in person, you would occasionally get some new people come in, newcomers, and they would, maybe you'd talk to them about Blavatsky and they would ask you, was she a medium? Or they would actually say, I think she was a medium, wasn't she? And people have that misconception. So she was not a medium, and she was not a channeler. You should never put those labels on her because that is not what she did. That is not how she worked. Now, I'm going to show you an excerpt on the next slide from an article by Gordon Plummer published in the American Theosophist, which is a journal that predated the Quest. In 1969, I dug this article up. It's a wonderful article called H.P. Blavatsky, The Mystery. She said, no, she's not a medium, she's a mediator. Now, this is open discussion time. Where do you usually hear that? In what context do you hear the word mediator used on the news or in newspapers? Like, I'll help you out here. Ford or Chevrolet, General Motors, they have a labor dispute, right? Labor wants certain, maybe better benefits or whatever, and management, they're looking at the bottom line. So they have two different goals, and they're butting heads like this. And they go on strike. The strike continues. They can't do production. Sales are dropping. So the corporate guys say, we can't let this go on forever. We're going to bring in a mediator. A mediator works with both sides, try to bring about a consensus, right? Get them to the table, the union head, the boss, the CEO, the CFOs, get these guys together at the table and try to reach a consensus. That's what a mediator does. But if you look in a dictionary, a good dictionary, not a cheap one, they usually have another meaning of mediator, which is someone who serves as like a messenger. So here we're going to go back to the quote, or go to the quote. Can't say go back. We didn't get there because I've been. All right. So the next quote is from that article. Here we go. Yeah. Was she a medium? Well, I told you what I think. And it's not just David Bruce that thinks that. Anybody that knows anything about theosophy will tell, or Blavatsky will tell you the same thing. So the case of a mediator is entirely different from that of the medium. During the time when he is working as the mouthpiece of his teacher, all of his faculties are awake and alert. This condition or this activity is not accompanied by a trance condition. A trance like Edgar Cayce or many other mediums. Remember in the early history when Blavatsky met Alcott, they were checking out mediums in, I think it was Vermont, in Eddie's farmhouse. And, you still have people, today they call them channelers, but typically they go into some kind of a trance. They're not really fully awake and alert. They're allowing their body or their mind to be used by some entity, known or unknown. And, they like to give names to them, exotic names to their entity, but they've never met them in the flesh. They're on the astral realm, and Some of them are just plain mediocre, and some seem to be quite intelligent. So there's a whole spectrum there. But I'm just talking now about the mechanics. A mediumship is very different from a mediator. The mediator knows exactly what he or she is doing and gladly gives of himself so that he can transmit the message that the teacher wishes to promulgate. Thus, we see that the word mediator is synonymous with messenger. So now we're going to look at some evidence. Remember, I spoke earlier. I said people watched her write. So this is from Henry Alcott. To see the hundreds of references to other authors, one might naturally suppose her possessed of a very extensive library, whereas, in point of fact, neither for Isis Unveiled nor the Secret Doctrine had she access to more than comparative handfuls. She had very few books. But if you look at the Secret Doctrine, the citations, it has over 1,100 citations. 1,100. You know, when I wrote my little book, Serving a Higher Purpose, I had citations, but it's a lot of work. You know, I would think, oh, I remember hearing a quote by Aristotle or somebody. Then you got to go find it. You got to look. It takes time. Then you got to verify. And then sometimes you hear a quote and it turns out it's not actually what the person said. It's been twisted or altered. So she had 1,100, and people actually checked those out. They went and these were from, many of them were from rare books, books that were published hundreds, centuries ago. Many of them, they had to go to the British Library to find these. So it was quite remarkable. So how did she do that if she only had a few books in her room? Another co-worker, Archibald Kitely, worked with her, basically saying the same thing as Alcott. What struck me most in the part I was able to read during my short stay, he was just there for a few weeks or months, was the enormous number of quotations from various authors. I knew that there was no library to consult, in other words, no public library, and I could see that HPB's own books did not amount to 30 in all, of which several were dictionaries. And then Jeffrey Barborka, the author of The Divine Plan, which is a study of the Secret Doctrine, a lifetime of study would be required to obtain the ability to evaluate and utilize the citations that are provided in her volumes. Just finding them is incredible, but to understand them, to know where to look, you'd have to be a full-time scholar in Eastern literature. And she certainly was not a scholar. She did not spend her time in public libraries. She did not, spend time reading books. That was not her. This is the head of the German TS at that time, also witnessed her. He said, I saw her write down sentences as if she were copying them from something before her, where, however, I saw nothing. And this is from old diary leaves, Henry Alcott's old diary leaves. To watch her at work was a rare, a rare and never to be forgotten experience. I can just picture him sitting across this big table. Her pen would be flying over the page when she would suddenly stop, look out into space with the vacant eye of the clairvoyant seer, shorten her vision as though to look at something held invisibly in the air before her, and begin copying what she saw on her paper. Probably looking at the astral, the astral light. That's what she would say. This continues. The quotation then finished, her eyes would resume their natural expression, in other words, their normal focus, and she would go on writing again until again stopped by a similar interruption. Now that is a remarkable observation. And Henry Alcott, you can be quite certain that his observations were accurate. Why? Because earlier in his career, he was a newspaper man for some of the New York papers. He knew how to write and observe. And he did that with her. And old diary is just full of things, statements like that. So in the book, this book here, some of you may have heard of it, H.P. Blavatsky, Tibet and Tulku. Barborka describes 7 types of occult processes that were used in the writing of the Secret Doctrine. This book, by the way, you can get it from Quest Books. It's actually published in India. Actually, I shouldn't say Quest Books. It's from the TPH, but you go through Quest Books. They have it. It's about $20. We also have it in our library. If you wanted to loan it out, you're a member, you can loan it. I tried reading it. I'm not embarrassed to say I didn't understand a lot of it. This whole idea of Tulku, very difficult, but there you have it. But Barborka is a scholar and I'm not. So here you go. Descriptor, these are the 7 types that are listed. Whoops, I went too far here. So I think the first categories, you probably have a pretty good idea. Precipitation is talked about. That's one of the methods used in the Mahatma letters. I'm not going to go into that because it requires a long explanation. And Tulku, gosh, the less I say about that, the better, because I'll make myself, I don't know anything. I don't understand it. I don't mind saying that. However, I can tell you this, and I'm just quoting Barborka. It's a Tibetan word describing one of the cities. The cities are the paranormal powers. And according to the author Barborka, it's a very closely guarded secret. So don't go buy that book. Don't pay the $20 if you think you're going to find out the secret. You'll find out what he says about it, but you're not going to get it. So I'll just tell you that up front. I don't want you to spend $20 and be disappointed. So returning to that quote from John Locke, just kind of recaps. New opinions are always suspected and usually opposed without any other reason because people are pig-headed. No, it didn't say that, but because they are not already common. Well, they are kind of pig-headed in a way. I think we all are from time to time. So this is one by the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer. He talks about the 3 stages. Truth path. First, it is ridiculed, made fun of. Second, when it doesn't go away by ridicule, they have to start opposing it violently and with putting pressure on it. But finally, if it sticks it out, if the people hold true, it is accepted. This is what happened with Christianity. It was originally the Roman empires. They threw the Christians in with the lions. Eventually, at some point, Justinian or one of the Roman emperors embraced the Christian religion, and then it became accepted. But that's true of many things, even in science. Galileo, the heliocentric, first it was ridiculed when Copernicus put it out, but then when a man of the stature of Galileo, the authorities say, we gotta put a stop to this nonsense because people respect him and we don't want them to be. So that's what happens. But eventually the truth wins out. The truth always wins out. Sometimes it just takes a lot of time, and it takes maybe some people giving up their lives, making huge sacrifices in the process. So we're getting to the end of this talk. Oh yeah, you know what? Let me. I jumped the gun here. Let me just backtrack. Okay, 1 second. I gotta find. There it is. These things keep jumping around. All right. Okay. So after that Schopenhauer quote, the truth finally wins out, but it takes their perspective of time. It takes perspective for a work of a writing, a scientific discovery, a musical composition, what have you. It takes time sometimes for it to be accepted. I'm going to give you a few examples. Again, the writings of Copernicus, Geo Donald Bruno and Galileo, some of their writings, well, everything Bruno wrote was heretical, but Galileo, some of the things he wrote were considered heretical. Did you know that the writings of Henry David Thoreau were at first considered eccentric? He wasn't no threat. There was no threat, but people just thought he's a wacko. Walden Pond and his stuff. They were largely ignored by the public. It was only many, many years later, after the transcendentalist movement with Emerson and so forth gained some respect, people started to look back at Thoreau's writing and say, yeah, wow. People started learning about nature. See, this was during the industrial era, and people didn't want to know about nature. But anyway, that's another example. And I'll give you an example. I'm a music major in college, so I'll throw out this composition by Igor Stravinsky, the famous Russian composer. Have you heard of The Rite of Spring? The Rite of Spring for orchestra. It's very rhythmic, very percussive. It's very different from anything people had heard. And in the debut performance in Paris in 1913, it almost caused a riot in the audience. But the critics panned it. The critics hated it, most of them. But later, it was considered, when time passed, people got used to it. Oh, this is a very important milestone, groundbreaking work, So now it's held up there as like something you can culture, a high point of culture. So that's what happens. Human beings are funny. And the same thing happened with the Secret Doctrine. Not for everybody, because a lot of people latched onto it right away. But other people who are a little bit slow, a little bit closed-minded, narrow thinking, they did not like it. And this include people both in the church and in the scientific community. So they ridiculed it. They even violently, attacked her, ad hominem attacks, personal attacks, rather than, that's what the people that don't have a good argument, what they do is they attack the messenger. It's a lot easier to attack the messenger than argue a case on the basis of the merits. And we still see that all the time. We see that all the time today. It's sad. So it's been 130 years or more since the Secret Doctrine was published. And I think we're finally getting into that third period of Schopenhauer where it's becoming accepted. Now, not in Wheaton College, the Billy Graham, no, the Bible College near the TS, those people will not accept it. But many other people have accepted these ideas of karma, reincarnation, and so forth. The idea that there's subtle bodies, etheric fields. This is pretty much way more common knowledge than it was in 1889 when this was released, or 1888. So now I go back to the screen, try to find my spot here. Yes, okay, here we go. So let me move this here. These things keep shifting. All right, what was the purpose behind? What was the reason her teachers asked her to go through all this work? And what did they hope to accomplish? So here we go. This is from a little bit, wait a minute, yes. These are verbatims. To show that nature is not a fortuitous concurrence of atoms. The universe, the solar system, the galaxy, it's not a result of blind chance. A lot of people today still believe that. But as Ed Abdil often sardonically remarked, if you believe that, then you have to believe that the Oxford Dictionary was put together, could be put together if you just put 100 monkeys in a room and let them bang on typewriters for eternity. Eventually, they would somehow, by blind chance, come up with the Oxford Dictionary. Can you spell stupid? I can. To assign humanity its rightful place in the scheme of the universe, to rescue from degradation the timeless truths, which are the basis of all religions. And that degradation, we can put that on that, who's responsible for that? Who owns that? The Christian missionaries that went to India and places like that, putting down the native religion, Hinduism stuff. They put it down, said, nope, you got to believe in Jesus. to uncover the fundamental unity from which those truths spring, and to demonstrate, finally, that the occult side of nature has never been approached by the science of modern civilization. Now, I'm not a scientist. I don't know much about scientists. Science, physics, biology in high school is probably my worst area. I only got C's. Everything else, I pretty much got A's and B's. I did not like science. I just got through the courses. But I can tell you this, that in the day that Blavatsky's day, they thought, the scientists thought, that the atom was a solid piece. They didn't know that it had subatomic particles. And Besant and Leadbeater talked about that. Guess who else knew about that? The ancient Greeks. They talked about it too. But that knowledge was lost through the centuries. But today, physics, through physics in the early part of the 20th century, they rediscovered these things. Finally, I will say regarding the book, The Secret Doctrine, it has withstood the test of time. You know, many books are published every year. It's very few, most of them go into the dumpster after, you know, they go into the used book sale or the half-price book sale. But this is still being put out. People are buying it. Secondly, it was a collaborative work. Not only HPB, but her teachers were involved. That's a big story in itself. And finally, we need to all give her a great deal of respect because she put herself out and suffered greatly to bring these teachings to the modern world. And I hold her, she was not perfect. We're not saying, nobody says she was a saint, but she did a great thing. She was a heroic figure. Heroic, I think, is apt adjective to use for her. Because she had to face great abuse and contempt and attacks. So finally, I'm going to close this out with a final quote, which is from Gottfried D. Perucker, another great scholar. H.P. Blavatsky, a breaker of the molds of mind, mover of the hearts and souls of men, producer of a new system of world thought. That is the founder of our Theosophical Society. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the conclusion of my presentation. I'm looking at the clock, Ron. Whoa, not bad, not bad. Not too bad there. So I guess it's question time or comment time.
Please, if you want to take your phones off of mute and ask Dave questions today, we've got the opportunity right now for you to come forward and just say, what about, or have you considered, or some of these good, helpful things that you want to pass on to our attendants here with the members and friends. You miss a wonderful opportunity, folks.
I think a lot of members of the society don't necessarily read The Secret Doctrine. They may purchase a copy and then try to start reading it. It's a difficult book. And for people that listen to this talk that I give, that I've just given to you, the main thing is I'm not trying to encourage you to go out and read it. That's not my purpose here. My purpose is to talk about what a unique, one aspect of why it's such a unique book, to give you a sense of deep appreciation for this book, which is many consider to be the magnum opus of our founder. This is her greatest work ever. And being a member of an organization like this, it's good to have a little bit of knowledge about a work like that. So when you're talking to people who are not familiar or not members, you can converse with them. But it's helpful to know that because you'll run into a lot of people, and even at the meetings, when you start meeting in person, they might ask you, and it's helpful to be able to have an intelligent, a knowledgeable answer. But whether you want to read it, like I said the other night, my mother was a Theosophist all her life from the age 20. My dad was a member too. I don't think either one of them we had the Secret Doctrine in their library, but I don't think either one of them read it all. I know they didn't read it all the way through. My mother told me it was too difficult. I remember her saying that. I was reading theosophical books since high school, and I would be reading the American Theosophist issues that my mom would get, and you'd always see articles there quoting the Secret Doctrine, and they'd be really dense quotations, excerpts. I would think, wow, this is really deep stuff, and it is. So I just thought I was kind of intimidated, and it wasn't probably till I was in my 40s, many years later, that I actually decided it's time, David, get yourself the book, dig into it, and I started. And it was a slow go, but it's there's no book like it anywhere. There's no book like it anywhere. And I'm a reader. I've read lots of books. There's nothing like this. I'm not saying it's the best book ever, but it's an outstanding book, and nothing like it anywhere.
Well, that's a really nice point where we can transition today. So David, thanks for sharing this excellent presentation with us here for the 1 hour. Ladies and gentlemen, David's going to be presenting a 2-hour workshop tomorrow beginning at 1 o'clock local time. Please check our website for information about navigating the Secret Doctrine. And I tell you, each of us that get into a course of study that's a group study all go through our little personal frustration with how to find things in there and figure out how it's all related. So check with our link on our Zoom site today. This recording is also the one that we just made. It's going to be available to you today in a couple hours after I get it uploaded the Zoom document that is a YouTube link that you'll be able to go in and watch this again if it was confusing in any way, or you'd like to share it with your own groups. Catherine, it's a long walk out here to Portland, and you may want to share it with some. That's the way to do it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So anyway, this is the deal. It's at portland.theosophical.org. I'll say it again. Portland, there's a period in the word theosophical, and there's a period, and the last part is org. And it'll be available later this afternoon. I look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow at 1 o'clock, and we'll get a chance to have a more active and participative time. So, Kathy, if you want to send out any sub information out to your group, the Carol group may really appreciate being able to decode and translate some of the transitions that are embedded in that Secret Doctrine. Let them know it's going to happen and it's important. David, anything else for us today?
Well, I would just mention, I think some of you undoubtedly already own a copy of the Secret Doctrine, but if you don't, if you're thinking about buying it, it's a 3-volume set, the one that Quest Books puts out. Volume 1 is Cosmogenesis, Volume 2, Anthropogenesis. The 3rd volume is just an index. It's not as large, but there's so much stuff in there. There's a separate volume for the index. It's $50, I think, around there. However, if you're not quite sure you want to spend $50 on it, some years ago, Joy Mills made an abridgment in paperback form, and I think that is like under $20. And if you call Quest Books with your member discount, you can probably get it for well under that. So I would say that would be the way to go if you're not sure. But if you really want to commit to have it in your personal library, why not go for, like I say, you probably already have it, some of you, but if you don't, I'll tell you, if all else fails, if you get it and you don't like it, it makes a terrific soporific. Soporific is something that puts you to sleep. So you read it late at night. If you have trouble getting to sleep, I guarantee you after about 2 paragraphs, you'll sleep like a baby.
Yeah. Hey, Wallace, you want to put in a deal for our library?
Well, not so much for the library, but I would like to say if you're thinking of the Secret Doctrine, you should check out The Evolution of the Higher Consciousness by Pablo Sender. at least the preface, at least the beginning, because he put the Secret Doctrine into terms that I could understand like I'd never heard it before.
And copies of that are available at our library also. We've got a good library, folks. Use it and abuse it. We've got a good librarian. So David, we'll see you tomorrow at 1 o'clock here, same bad
All right.
same channel.
No, wait, what time is it tomorrow?
Uno, 1.
So that's 3 o'clock my time. Okay.
Yeah, that's correct. Yes, sir. And we'll,
I might be able to get the Bears game in. No, I don't watch football. Forget it. I just kidding.
silly boy. All right,
All right.
everybody, one more time, thanks very much. See you tomorrow.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Namaste.
Thank you. Thank you.
You are very welcome, Catherine.
Thank you.
Yes, Jim.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Well, Gerald, thanks for muting.